to this edition of No Free Lunch, Economics for a Fallen World. I'm Professor Jeff Guernsey, joined today, as always, by Dr. Jeff Heyman. Dr. Heyman, we want to talk today about private property and it leading to markets. Make a connection for us there.
Sure. I mean, private property is kind of the essential condition, if you will. It's foundational to having free markets in general. And we could say something even stronger. If you allow private property, you're going to have markets emerge. It's just a natural result, if you will, of people that are made in the image of God having different aptitudes, different interests, and different preferences. Some people like one consumption choice, other people like a different one. And in a world that's different, and we see a lot of diversity in God's creation, both from a production standpoint. For instance, Ohio can produce things a lot differently than say Maine can. We can produce corn very efficiently compared to lobsters. For some reason, they do a much better job. And so there's this diversity in production. There's a diversity in how we think about the things we like. And what that means is if you have private property rights, and what we mean by that, as we have referred to earlier, that's really effectively private stewardship responsibilities, because these are assets that are delegated to us from God that we need to steward well and will be held to account. But when we have that, fundamental must be that we are free to exchange that property. We're free to consume that property. We are free to improve that property. We are free to exchange it to others. And now tying those two things together, the fact that we have different interests, different aptitudes, and the fact that we are free to exchange means you might look at some stuff that I have. You might come into my office and say, I would love to have that book. And he might value that book more than I value it. And if he has something I want, we might do a trade. Adam Smith talked about that. He says, we have this propensity to truck, barter, and exchange. And another economist that I was reading one day was quibbling with that. We don't have some propensity, like we naturally like to do that, although some people do like to do the deal. There are a few. But we all like to improve our condition. If we can do this deal, it gives us, in our own internal perspective, a better basket of consumption goods, right? We have more things that we control. Our welfare is improved, or our utility, we would say, it would be improved by this trade. And so that's really one of the reasons why markets are going to naturally emerge. They tend to do so wherever you have private property rights. So we see that historically.
And probably the rule of law as well, knowing what the rules are going to be of exchange and so forth.
Yeah.
So let's think about the opposite side of that in places where there maybe are not clear property rights. So DeSoto, a well-known economist in The Mystery of Capital, wrote about, I think, Peru, his home country, where people did not have rights to the improvements that they made on their house, because they didn't have title to that property, so therefore they couldn't access that, what he called capital, what you're calling property more broadly. And then we could think of some economies where there isn't private property, but it's commonly held and so forth.
Sure.
How do those things impact or impede markets?
That's a really big question. You've got a whole bunch of it, but we'll just tackle just a couple of those. What we do see historically is this lack of title and the lack of property means that you don't have the real incentive to be able to invest into that property, such that you're not willing to build up. So DeSoto, you're right, he mentioned Peru. His book also talked about Haiti, Egypt, and other places which didn't have that. And one of the things he showed was in Haiti, for instance, that's precisely why we see all those shanty towns. When people don't have legal title to the property, they don't have any incentive to invest a lot of money and resources into it because it's not secure. It means that they can't be sure that they would get the benefit. And one of the powerful benefits of a free market economy is precisely that it aligns incentives to serve the broader social welfare by giving people security and the ability of what they produce, that they would get the benefit of that. And so when we look at countries that don't, you can look at Haiti, which didn't have those same level of private property rights and titling. They've lagged. For those countries that socialist and communist countries that did not allow private property property rights in the means of production, that meant that there was less incentive for people to be willing to work, save, and invest, and we saw much slower economic growth. As just kind of the most drastic example of that was after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, where they completely tried to eliminate money and monetary economy totally, and they were facing mass starvation until they reversed course and allowed people's plots to small agricultural plots, while the whole Soviet Union owned the big farms. They allowed them just small plots, and we saw that Mao did a similar kind of thing, and that was enough to at least sustain the peasants could grow enough so that they didn't starve to death. So it can be rather extreme. If you do not have security, you don't have the incentive, and you don't have the production. And it's not just in those other countries. Do not think it couldn't happen to us. The early Pilgrims, when they landed in America, had a very brutal winter because they had a socialist compact. And the next year they opened up markets, and after about half of the people died. And there are stories out, and maybe we'll put a link to this as we post this. So,
yeah, well, thanks for connecting private property and markets, the creation of markets. And you heard Dr. Heyman mention incentives, and as you know by now, incentives matter. So thanks for taking a few moments today for this edition of No Free Lunch, Economics for a Fallen World.